It was the kind of case that haunted detectives long after they'd boxed up the evidence and moved on. A mystery buried in time, with no answers and no closure. For 3 decades, the murder of 19-year-old Karen Holt was a name spoken in hushed tones within the cold case files of the Greenville Police Department. It was a tragedy that had scarred a family, bewildered a town, and eluded some of the sharpest investigative minds in law enforcement. But in 2022, against all odds, the case that had once grown cold was suddenly reignited. Not by a new witness, but by a strand of DNA no wider than a human hair. This is the story of how a 30-year-old murder mystery was finally solved, and how the truth, no matter how long buried, has a way of clawing its way to the surface. The year was 1992. The town of Greenville, North Carolina, was a quiet college community surrounded by woods and farmland. Crime was rare. Murder was rarer. So when Karen Holt, a bright, artistic freshman at East Carolina University, didn't show up for class one Monday morning, friends were concerned, but no one imagined the worst. Karen had spent the weekend alone at her off-campus apartment while her roommates were out of town. She was seen Saturday afternoon at a nearby grocery store, smiling and chatting with a cashier she knew. That would be the last confirmed sighting of her alive. On Monday evening, police were called to her apartment by a worried professor who hadn't heard from her. Inside, they found no signs of forced entry. The door was locked. The living room appeared undisturbed. But in the bedroom, the scene was different. Karen's body was found sprawled on the floor, partially covered by a blanket. She had been strangled. Her fingernails were broken, suggesting a struggle. Her wallet, purse, and car keys were still in the room. Nothing appeared to have been stolen. Whoever killed Karen hadn't come for money. They'd come for her. The investigation began immediately, with detectives canvassing neighbors, friends, classmates. A former boyfriend was questioned, but had an alibi. A maintenance worker was considered, but ruled out by fingerprint evidence. Despite exhaustive efforts, no suspect was ever arrested. The case grew cold quickly. In the absence of video surveillance or modern forensic technology, investigators could only speculate. The working theory was that Karen may have known her attacker, perhaps had let them in voluntarily, but with no physical evidence that could be tied to anyone, the case slowly faded into the unsolved files. For the next 30 years, Karen's family kept her memory alive, visiting her grave, holding candlelight vigils, writing letters to police urging them to reopen the case. Each time a new detective was assigned to cold cases, Karen's file was among the first reviewed. Over the years, dozens of tips came in, none leading to anything concrete. Rumors swirled, stories evolved, but the truth remained elusive. Then in 2019, a new piece of technology offered a glimmer of hope. Forensic genealogy. Detective Sarah Whitaker, a second-generation officer known for her relentless tenacity, took over the cold case unit that year. She had grown up hearing about Karen Holt's murder. To her, it was personal. One afternoon, she pulled the case file and began reviewing the evidence, page by page, photo by photo. When she found that a small swab of DNA had been preserved from beneath Karen's fingernails, she knew what she had to do. Back in 1992, the DNA had yielded no matches in the National CODIS database. But by 2019, new techniques were allowing forensic labs to identify potential suspects through genealogical databases used by everyday people for ancestry research. Detective Whitaker sent the sample to a private lab specializing in forensic genealogy. Months passed. Then came the call. A familial match had been found. Not a direct hit, but a distant relative. The lab's genealogists got to work, building a family tree that spanned 5 generations. Slowly, methodically, they narrowed it down. At the end of the branch was a name: Robert Allen Kinley. Kinley was 58 years old, living in South Carolina, working as a building contractor. He had no prior arrests, no known connection to Karen Holt, at least none on paper. But further investigation revealed that in 1992, Kinley had been living in Greenville. He worked part-time at a hardware store just 2 blocks from Karen's apartment. Records showed that he had delivered supplies to the apartment complex where she lived. At the time, no one had connected him to the crime. He hadn't been interviewed. He had no criminal record. Detective Whitaker began surveillance. Over the course of 2 weeks, Kinley's trash was collected and examined. A coffee cup yielded DNA. The match was conclusive. It was his DNA under Karen Holt's fingernails. The case that had stumped investigators for 30 years had found its answer and its killer. In April 2022, Kinley was arrested and charged with the murder of Karen Holt. He denied everything, claimed he had no idea who she was, but the evidence was irrefutable. Confronted with the DNA and the timeline, Kinley finally broke. He confessed to entering Karen's apartment under the guise of delivering a maintenance notice. When she let him in, he tried to assault her. When she fought back, he panicked and strangled her. He fled, leaving no trace, or so he thought. His confession closed the final chapter of a decades-long mystery. In the courtroom, Karen's family sat quietly, holding one another. They had waited 30 years for this moment. Justice long delayed, but not denied. Kinley was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led away in handcuffs, Karen's mother whispered through tears, "She didn't die forgotten.